Let's take a look at another resolve, reconcile, explain question. Which one of the following true most helps to explain the greater decline among sugar maples? So here, keyword explain, resolve, reconcile, explain. Okay, let's take a look at the stimulus. Once again, we're going to encounter a set of facts, a phenomenon, if you will. And this phenomenon is going to generate in us the psychological reaction of, that's weird. And from there, we're going to work out some hypothesis that can explain this phenomenon. Okay, so when a forest is subject to acid rain, the calcium level in the soil declines. Already I'm like, man, I know nothing about this, right? But you got to paint a picture. This is not too difficult. You can conjure up the image of a forest. Okay, now just conjure up some acid rain falling in the forest. And now think of the soil, right? There's stuff in the soil. One of the things in the soil is calcium. And the first sentence is telling you the calcium levels are decreasing. There's less calcium in the soil because of the acid rain. Fine. Spruce, a kind of tree. Fir, a kind of tree. Sugar maple, kind of tree. Right? They're all just trees. They all need calcium to survive. Okay, so I'm thinking, this is not good for spruces, firs, and sugar maples, right? Because they need calcium to survive. Just know this. And then we're told that calcium levels are declining because of acid rain. However, sugar maples in forests that receive significant acid rain are much more likely to show signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency than are spruces or firs in such forests. So this is comparative, right? Comparative. What are we comparing? On the one hand, sugar maples. On the other hand, spruces or firs, right? Are they like from different forests? No, this in the same forest, right? In forests, what kind of forest? That receive significant amounts of acid rain in that kind of forest. Here, it's in the same forest. Such forest is referential phrasing, referring back to exactly the same forest. So, okay, they're different trees, but in the same forest, we're comparing sugar maples on one hand, spruces or firs on the other hand. What are we comparing them on? Which one is more likely to show signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency? So apparently calcium deficiency has some indicators, right? I don't know what they are. Maybe the leaves get brown or the branches get brittle or something, right? But whatever those signs are, we're saying comparing sugar maples on the one hand versus spruces and firs on the other hand, sugar maples are more likely to show signs of that decline, right? So I didn't, explicitly map all this out. Hopefully at this point, doing comparative analysis is getting a little bit easier. Okay, so really this question is why, right? Like, doesn't this make you go, that's weird, right? This is strange. And here I think it should. Unlike the previous question about Jimmy and his new gas water heater, because I don't know anything about spruces and firs and sugar maples. From what you're telling me, I do think it's weird because I can't come up with any explanations, at least not readily apparent explanations for why sugar maples are showing signs of decline more so than spruces and firs. I mean, all I know is that all three of them need calcium to survive. Shouldn't they all equally show signs of decline, right? So this psychological feeling of that's weird, I'm going to need some kind of hypothesis to explain this, right? And again, let's play this game. What kind of hypotheses can we come up with? If we just pause for a minute or two and think about the kinds of explanations, I bet you we can come up with quite a few. Now, the first one that I'm going to mention might not be something you thought of, but I want to give you a bit of a clue. And this is based on the previous question where we said that rating is merely an indication of efficiency. Right? Having a rating of highly efficient doesn't necessarily mean you are highly efficient. It's just, it's a piece of evidence that suggests you might be highly efficient. There's something like that going on here too with indication versus reality, right? The indicator for something versus the underlying reality for something. And it's right here. Show signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency. Are they actually declining because of calcium deficiency? Right? We don't really know. I mean, again, this is a piece of evidence that they are because, you're showing signs of decline consistent with calcium deficiency. That's a piece of evidence, but I don't know if you actually are declining. So, right, your hypothesis could be this. Could be that, we're just misinterpreting these signs, right? First hypothesis. These signs are actually, there are many ways to formulate this hypothesis, but here's one way. The signs are actually pointing to some other underlying issue. Right? So if whatever those signs were, say brown leaves, right? Brown leaves, okay, fine. That's a sign consistent with calcium deficiency. If the tree had calcium or calcium deficient, it would have brown leaves. But you know what? Maybe we're just misreading the signs. Brown leaves could also result from a fungus infection. Maybe the brown leaves that we take to be the signs of calcium deficiency actually is pointing to fungus infection. So that would resolve the discrepancy. Okay, so I point this out. I mean, I feel like that's probably not the most obvious one. You probably didn't, and truly the answers did not go for this one. Okay, but I want you to see how repetitive the LSAT is. Just in the space of 2 questions, 2 resolve, reconcile, explain questions, we already see the repetition of the idea of an indicator versus reality, right? An indicator versus reality. Here it's signs of decline versus reality of actual calcium deficiency. In the previous one, it was rating of efficiency versus the actual reality of whether the thing is efficient. That's a concept that's going to repeat all across the LSAT. Right, and lots of different logical reasoning questions. So I want you to be sensitive to it. Okay, let's keep going. Let's come up with more hypotheses. So perhaps, and again, I don't really know much about trees, and these trees in particular, but just trees generally. So I don't know if this even makes sense, but maybe sugar maples are super sensitive. They're highly sensitive. Whereas, on the flip side, spruces and firs are more robust. Right? They're just less sensitive to changes in calcium levels. Like sugar maple, you decrease the calcium just a tiny bit, it's going to really start to suffer. Whereas for spruces and firs, you have to really sap all the calcium out of the soil before you start to see them declining. Right? That's possible. And this is pointing to a close reading of this sentence, which just says spruces, firs, sugar maples all need calcium to survive. We don't know if that means they all need the same amount of calcium to survive. In other words, you don't want to assume anything about their sensitivity, right? So that's the second hypothesis. Now there's more. Where is the rain falling? Now we know they're all in the same forest. That was established with this referential phrasing, right? Sure, they're all in the same forest. But just because they're all in the same forest, you don't want to assume that the rain is hitting the entire forest uniformly. And that's an idea that we've encountered before as well. Variance. Right? I mean, I'm sure it has something to do with the canopy of the forest. It has something to do with the contours of the actual landscape, the geography. Maybe the forest slopes in one way so that all the water pools, all the rainwater pools here. Right? Do you see? So it's actually possible that the sugar maples are situated in a part of the forest that received more acid rain than the spruces and firs. Right? Just like, do you recall from the microwave question, the hot zones, the super hot zones inside the microwave in the water that you're heating up? It's the same idea. You don't want to assume uniformity. So here, again, there are a number of ways to write this hypothesis down, but I'll just say that the sugar maples got rained on more, right? Got rained on more. Okay, so we can keep going. I'm going to stop. And at this point, before we look at the questions, I want to do a sidebar and talk a bit about efficiency. We're a ways into the question stem. So now I think it makes sense for you to start thinking about how to be efficient with this test. Generally speaking, and what I'm about to say, of course, is a spectrum, but I just want to give you the 2 extreme ends of the spectrum. But generally speaking, you can either be in passive mode with respect to the answer choices, or you can be in active mode. I like to think of the active mode as I'm in hunt mode. I'm hunting for the right answer choice, right? I kind of already have in my mind some idea of the shape of the answer choice, and I'm going to go hunt for it. So this happens in the vast majority main point, main conclusion questions. You're in hunt mode because you already identified the question, right? Just laser focused on the right answer. For MSS questions, right? For MSS questions, some of them you can be in hunt mode for, but not all of them. A lot of the MSS questions are actually more passive. Right, but some of them you can just kind of, everything builds together to something, so you anticipate it. Versus passive mode, or what's known as process of elimination, you're just letting the answers feed you, right? Read A, nah, that's not it. Read B, no, that's not it. Read C, that's not it. And as we saw with weakening questions, the vast majority of weakening questions are in this mode. This is your posture, your stance, right? And it makes sense because there's just so much there's so much information out in the world that could be relevant to what we're talking about. How can you possibly anticipate? And this is just an exercise of, I suppose 2 things. One, it is to help you get better at understanding the relationship between phenomenon on the one hand and hypothesis, right? These are all hypotheses on the other hand. But it's also an illustration of the fact that this list can just go on and on and on. What are the odds that you're going to come upon we're not in weakening, we're in RE, that you're going to come upon the hypothesis that the LSAT writers happen to think of? The odds are like close to nothing, right? So in other words, for resolve, reconcile, explain questions, generally speaking, you're also in passive process of elimination mode. That's the more efficient route to the right answer. Okay, so again, like I said, this is a spectrum. So it's not like, oh, it's black or white. No, it is a spectrum. So you can be a little bit over here, a little bit over here. But I'm just laying out, generally speaking, RE tends to be more passive. So with that said, let's look at answer choice A, which says soil in which calcium levels are significantly diminished by acid rain is also likely to be damaged in other ways by acid rain. I like this answer choice because it's got a lot of features of what makes a wrong answer choice attractive. Now, I hope you'll agree with me, this is not the right answer choice, because I don't know why the soil, which say it's this soil that we're talking about, the soil in which calcium levels are significantly diminished by acid rain, right? That's the descriptor of the soil. Here's the predicate, is also likely to be damaged in other ways by acid rain. Fine. Right? So this soil is not just suffering from calcium deficiency, it's also suffering from, say, magnesium deficiency. Okay, I don't know why that would differentially explain the symptoms, the signs of decline that we're observing in sugar maple versus spruce and fir. Right? That for that simple reason, A is not right. It doesn't explain the phenomenon. But I do want to say that A is trying really hard, I think, to get us to think about like, oh, maybe it's the other kinds of damages to soil, right? Whatever this other way, this other kind of damage to soil, maybe that's what the sugar maple is reacting to. Okay, fine, right? Fine. So there we're starting to get somewhere with the hypothesis, but you still need to ask yourself, well, hold on, why is it that the spruce and fir aren't reacting that way? So really, in order for A to do to be right, I mean, we have to fix a lot of things, but one of the things we need to fix is that you have to say something like, it's also likely to be damaged in other ways by acid rain in such a way that sugar maples would react to by displaying signs of decline similar to that which it would display if it were suffering from calcium deficiency, and spruces and firs wouldn't react in such ways. Do you see, like with all of that, then A will be much improved. But there's also another issue with A, which is that we don't even know if this is the soil that we're talking about. Like the soil here, is it the same soil here? We don't know, because look at the descriptor in which calcium levels are significantly diminished by acid rain. Do we know that whatever forest we're in, that the calcium levels have been significantly diminished? We don't. We only know that this forest that we're in has received significant acid rain. Does receiving significant acid rain mean that your calcium levels have been significantly diminished? I don't know. I don't know how much acid rain it takes to diminish calcium levels by how much. Do you see, that's another trick that the LSAT writers like to use. They repeat descriptors. Notice the noun here is forest, right? Forest modified by what? That receives significant acid rain. Here, the noun is soil, in which calcium levels are significantly diminished. That's totally different. Totally, completely different. So that's another major issue with answer choice A. Okay. So that might have been a bit of an overkill. We didn't need to bully A that hard, but let's take a look at B, which says sugar maples that do not receive enough calcium deteriorate less rapidly than spruces and firs that do not receive enough calcium. So this is a great exercise in grammar analysis, right? What's the noun here? Sugar maple modified that do not receive enough calcium. Right? That's the kind of sugar maple we're talking about. Compared to, right, comparative statement, spruces and firs modified that do not receive enough calcium. Right, so that's what we're comparing. Sugar maples on the one hand, spruces and firs on the other, but not normal sugar maples and not normal spruces or firs. We're talking about the calcium deficient sugar maples and the calcium deficient spruces and firs. What are we comparing them on? Which one deteriorates less rapidly? Deteriorate less rapidly, not more rapidly. More rapidly would be like your green, healthy plant to dust. Right, very quickly in a day. That's more rapidly. Less rapidly, meaning that process slow, right? Slow. Which one is slower in deterioration? This one is, right? That's all B is saying. Hopefully you just run through, like, I mean, I've lost track of how many comparative statements we've encountered up to this point in the lessons, right? But hopefully like you take the opportunity each time you get in a comparative statement, just do the exercise so that it just becomes second nature. Comparative statements, yeah, they're super easy. Because once you're able to do that, you'll realize B has nothing to do with an explanation. How can this explain this? I just need to know why the sugar maples here, why they're actually more likely to show signs of calcium deficiency than our spruces and firs. You're telling me, oh, but if the sugar maple actually is calcium deficient, and you look at spruces and firs that actually is calcium deficient, then this one deteriorates less. Okay, thanks, right? Thanks, but it doesn't explain the phenomenon. How about C? Spruces and firs, unlike sugar maples, can extract calcium from a mineral compound that is common in soil and it's not affected by acid rain. Now, I don't think we came up with that, right? This is not one of our hypotheses. I don't think I ever could have come up with that. You could have given me 24 hours to think about this. I wouldn't have come up with this hypothesis. For the simple reason I just don't know enough about, I don't even know what discipline this is. Forest ecology, I suppose, right? I just don't know enough about forest ecology, let's say. So all the more reason not to rely on active hunt mode for RRE questions, all the more reason to do passive process of elimination. You just don't know what hypothesis they're going to feed you, right? But recognize when they feed you a good hypothesis, and this is a good hypothesis. They're telling us spruces and firs have a superpower that sugar maples don't. Their superpower is that when calcium is deficient in the soil, you know what they can do? They can extract calcium somehow, I don't know how, from rocks. Right? From rocks. And this source of calcium that they have access to that sugar maples don't, that source is unaffected by acid rain. Well, great. That completely explains it. This tells me how come sugar maples are the ones showing decline when spruces and firs are not showing declines, because spruces and firs are like, it's no big deal, right? It's like the bar down the street closed. I have access to 10 other bars. Whereas the sugar maple had only access to that bar. So once it closed, it got sad. Now, one other thing I want to say about C is that you don't want to think that C is somehow contradicting the facts in the stimulus. That's not something that you're ever going to want to do for RRE questions. That is really akin to denying premises for weakening questions, right? You don't ever do that. For weakening questions, premises are untouchable. For RRE questions, the entire stimulus is untouchable. You don't ever, oh, I know how to explain it. You were just wrong. There was no acid rain in that forest. See, you can't do that. That's just too uninteresting, right, as a hypothesis. Oh, you just got your facts wrong, right? It's too uninteresting. So they're never going to do that. And I point this out because perhaps you eliminated C because you misread C, because you thought C was trying to contradict one of our facts, but it's not, right? It's not. C is entirely consistent with the facts. The fact is just that, look, you have soil, right? You have soil. There's calcium in the soil, and acid rain reduces that calcium. C is just telling you that, you know what else is in the soil? Rocks. There are rocks in that soil. Those rocks, some of them contain calcium as well. And because they're encased in rock, they're not as affected by calcium rain. They're not as affected by acid rain. That's all, right? It is entirely consistent with the stimulus. Let's look at D, which says sugar maples require more calcium in the spring and summer than they do in the fall and winter. Oh man, D was so close. D was kind of like, it's at least the way it started out, was kind of like 2. I was thinking maybe D would say something like sugar maples require more calcium than what? Than spruces and firs, right? If it has said sugar maple require more calcium to be healthy than spruces and firs require much more calcium to be healthy than spruces and firs, that's suggesting that sugar maples are actually super sensitive, such that a decline would result in sugar maples showing symptoms first. And then if the decline continues, spruces and firs will show symptoms. But the way that D went is like, oh, whoops, you missed your exit, right? And you start talking about summer and spring compared to fall and winter. What do right? What do we know about, is this happening summer and spring? And we have no idea. So we don't know what to do with this information. We don't know how to make this information relevant to the phenomenon here. Okay, one last answer choice, E. Unlike spruces or firs, most sugar maples are native to areas that receive a lot of acid rain. Now, E is trying to get you, if you didn't realize, or if you forgot, or if you misread, that we're actually talking about the same forest. Referential phrasing. They already told us that the spruces and firs are in the same forest that the sugar maples are in. That's why it was puzzling to begin with. I mean, imagine if you talk about like sugar maples in one forest in Maine and spruces and firs in another forest in Vermont, and you're like, oh, weird. How come nobody would think that's weird? It's because they're in different forests, duh. Right? Do you see? So they already set that up such that you couldn't just get away with saying something silly like this. That, oh, they're actually in different locations, and the location where sugar maples are more prone to getting acid rain than spruces and firs. But like the fact that E is present is telling. The LSAT writers know that some portion of students are going to misread this, are not going to bother with a referential phrasing, and therefore not paint the right picture in their minds.